Hello, fellow doctors. My name is Michael. I'm a first year medical student at the Aristotle School of Medicine, Thessaloniki, and I thought I'd share with you how to get full marks for every single anatomy test for the rest of your medical school career. And what's great is that this actually works for all the subjects, not just anatomy, but I've just found it particularly helpful for anatomy. So here's a thought for you. How great would it be if you could predict the content of your final exam, but like before the exam? Like how great would it be if at home you could practice 200 questions, knowing that of those 200 questions, they'll cover about 70 to 80% of the content of the exam. And that's actually possible. So what I'm going to share with you today is how to do that. And so the principle is that you can use an artificial intelligence, right? If you can train it off of data, all right? So if you can train it off of all of your resources from medical school, and you can train it off of all the past papers, and just throw a bunch of data in it, and the presentations, and even better if you can get lectures, but if you can throw all of that data into it, then you can actually create a pretty accurate model. And you can optimize this on a number of levels. To create a better model, you can give it more context, or you can give it sort of a recursive loop. So here's what I mean. You start off on level 0, right? So on level 0, you would just give context on the subject. So you would say, hi, ChatGPT, my name is Michael. I'm a first-year medical student. Our Anatomy 1 exam covers muscles, bones, and joints. Create some practice questions for me to have fun with, right? So I mean, that's better than if you did not have the practice questions, but we can get better, right? We can optimize context. So if you go up one level, then you can give it more context on the content, right? So here you would drop in all of your resources, right? So you give it all the class presentations and all of your notes and all of your friends' notes, and maybe you've got class recordings, or maybe like you found like some article online that was like explanatory. You drop in all of that, you give it a lot of context on the content, and then you've sort of leveled up. You'll see that the questions have gotten much better. You can fully optimize on context, and you can give it context on your expectations. Now, what I mean here is that if you were to dump in past papers, if your school has got them, or if not, even if you were to dump in sort of practice questions that have helped you in the past, or any context on your expectations, any context on what the ideal question would look like. What's the ideal question? The ideal question is one that comes up in the exams, right? So you can give it past exams and then it knows ideal questions. And so if you can give it context on your expectations as well, then it's incredibly powerful, right? And so that's the way you build up the context triangle. You give it context on your subject, you give it context on your content, and then you give it context on your expectations. But we can take this to another level because there's actually a second variable that we can tweak, and this is recursiveness, right? So you can initiate recursive self-improvement where the model goes back on itself to improve and improve and improve. Sort of the parallel you want to think about is like consider anyone doing anything, right? Like I don't know, at let's say you're studying anatomy, right? So your first anatomy test is like, sure, you do well, and it's like, you know, you must study a lot for it. Then on your second anatomy test, you got some takeaways from the first one, you know, some like tips and some tricks, and maybe you decide to do flashcards and you decide to like make mind maps and stop writing notes, right? So your second test goes better. And then your third test goes even better because you've like further streamlined the study process and you've gotten more study tips. And so sort of as you get better from test 1 to test 2 to test 3, right, an AI can do the same thing. So in the beginning, it'll be a lot worse than after you have used it a little bit. And that's the whole idea of recursiveness. The idea of recursiveness is that you make a loop. So it generates something, and then it corrects itself, and then it corrects itself, and then it corrects itself, and then it corrects itself. And so as you've got this recursive self-improving loop, you can optimize on the second variable, on recursiveness. So on the first level would be an agentic loop. And what I mean is that you have AI agents talking to each other. So what you can do here is you can spin up Now, it doesn't help you spin up multiple agents in the same AI like app or of the same model, right? Because it's like you're talking to a mirror. It's like that doesn't help. It talks back to itself. It's an echo chamber. Instead, what you want to do is you want to spin up multiple agents that have been trained differently. So this could be different models from the same AI provider, or even better, different AIs from different providers, because all providers, they all train their AIs differently. They've got different data and sort of different things that they optimize for. So you can create an agentic loop where AI agents correct each other, and like this, they all get better together. I'll give you a practical example of what I'm doing. I've got Claude, which is sort of the service by Anthropic. I've got Claude that's generating questions, and then I've got Grok, which is like another AI. He's also generating questions. And sort of what I've realized is that, Claude is good at, I'll give him the content. He's good at going like really deep, really analytical. And then Grok is better at sort of making connections. Like if he knows that in my test I've got bones, muscles, and joints, and he's making question about muscles, he will make sure to interconnect it with previous content or with future content. So he'll interconnect the bones and the muscles, and it just activates new pathways, and it's really great. Grok is very creative. He's truth-oriented. And so what you can do is you can set up an agentic loop. You can get Grok to help Claude, and they can give feedback to each other. What I do is I get Grok and Claude to both make questions on the same topic, and then I go through both of their questions, and then I'll point out to Grok, I'll say, your questions 1, 3, and 5 were great, and then I'll tell Claude, your questions, 6, 7, and 8 were great. They save down what questions they're good at, and then after I've done my entire review session, I take those saved questions from Grok, and I take those saved questions from Claude, and I say, Claude, you've done a good job. Here are the best questions, and I give him his saved questions. See what you can learn from them, right? What are the takeaways? Identify some variables or some elements that I like so that your future questions can get better. And then I will give Claude the questions that I liked from Grok. And I will say, here are questions from another AI. It's a fresh perspective. These are also questions that I appreciated. What can you learn from them, right? How can you get better? And so now I've created this agentic loop, right? Where the agent gets better from input with other agents. The final way that you could optimize would be by throwing a human into the loop. So maybe you've done the practice questions, you go into your exam, and then after the exam, you have a takeaway that sort of the format of those questions are wrong, right? Maybe those questions were testing like a conceptual understanding, maybe those questions were focused on how different topics interplay with each other and how they're all interconnected. But what you should have been focusing on, what would have helped you more in the test, would be if you had a fundamental understanding of the first principles, right, of the anatomy, right? So like maybe spatial anatomy. And so that is sort of a human takeaway. Like the AI couldn't know that. That's a human takeaway that you make after the test, and then after the test you tell the AI, and now all of a sudden it's learned, right? There's this recursion, there's this human loop where after every test, once you give it feedback, it gets better, right? So that's one way that you can make a human loop. To conclude, to summarize, if you were to create the best possible AI system, you would optimize on 2 variables, right? You would optimize on the context variable, you would give context on your subject, you would give context on the content, and you would give context on your expectations. And then you would optimize a second variable, which is that you would implement recursiveness, right? So you would implement recursiveness through an agentic loop. You get the agents to give feedback to other agents, and sort of it goes on in a loop. And then you can implement recursiveness through a human loop as well. I hope you found that useful. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new, and I hope that you try this out and that it benefits you as much as it did me. If you liked the contents of this video, then you should check out an upcoming video, which will be posted by the time you're watching. And there I talk about my AI implementation in my workflow as a medical student. So as a whole, right, how I use AI to study. And I don't discuss what I've discussed in this video, which is sort of, generating practice questions. But instead, I talk about how I like to talk to the AI, how I like to get the AI to teach me. And also something incredibly important that I think is often slept upon, but this idea of a memory folder, right? You can give your AI a memory. You can give it a brain so that it doesn't make the same mistake twice. So if that sounds interesting, please check that out as well.